In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your front CV axle. And the job is actually a lot simpler than it might seem. So let's get started. To start, let's remove the wheel. Typically, you'll have a 21mm lug nut, but these are not factory wheels, so for me, I'm going to use a 19mm. Regardless of your size, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then we'll remove the wheel. Next, take a screwdriver, and we have to get this cap off. They do make a tool for it, but if you don't have it, you can hammer a screwdriver in here. Once you get it split enough, you can probably stick a pry bar in here. This will get it out a little further. There we go. Let's get rid of this cotter pin here. Discard it, always use a new one. Take the locking cap off of the nut and then use a 36mm and remove this nut. Shouldn't be too tight. Now make sure your axle pushes through the hub like that. If it's stuck, you can use a punch and a hammer right in the center where there's that divot, and you can slide it through without damaging the threads. From underneath, let's remove the 4 14mm bolts that hold this ball joint to the knuckle. There is one on the back side right over here that you can't see, but it's there. At this point, you should be able to lift the knuckle off of that ball joint. If it doesn't separate, like it's the case for us, just use a hammer and tap it free. Now let's move the knuckle aside while pushing the axle through. All that's holding it on is the upper ball joint at this point. Be careful not to pull on your brake hose too far, but that shouldn't be an issue. Okay, there we go. Now if you look through here, you'll see that there's a little notch on the inner CV joint of the axle right here. And I'm going to use a pry bar from underneath and pop it right out of the differential. I will, however, put a collection bucket underneath because it's most likely going to leak some gear oil. Okay, slide it out. And there's your CV axle. This is the perfect opportunity to replace your carrier bearing / differential seal if yours is leaking. Mine is fine, so I'm just going to take the new axle and slide it straight in. Once you get it in there, make sure you give it a couple turns so the splines can line up, and once they do line up, I'm going to take a rubber mallet, hit it on the end of the axle here. This will transfer the shocks through and press it in. And the reason you want to use a rubber mallet is because a steel hammer will damage the threads. There we go. You can hear an audible difference in the hammering. It sounds more full, less hollow, and that means it's bottomed out. You can also see, if you look right there, that it is completely pressed up against the differential all the way back there. Next, I always recommend putting some anti-seize on the splines of the axle. This will prevent the axle from getting stuck inside the hub in the future. You don't have to put a lot, just enough to lightly coat them. Now take your knuckle, swing it forward, push the axle up, slide it through the knuckle, or through the hub I should say, and give it a couple twists if the splines don't line up. There we go. And now just try to line up the ball joint with the knuckle so we can stick the bolts through and clamp them together. Try to start whatever bolt seems to line up first. I got one started. First one's the most difficult one. There's a lot of moving pieces here. This ball joint will just swivel all over the place. With that first one started, I'm going to try and start a second one. This time it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, I got it, and let's do the other side as well. The reason I'm doing this all with a wrench by hand is because it's very easy to cross thread these into the knuckle, and if you cross thread the threads in here, the knuckle is damaged, and then you are looking at retapping threads in the knuckle. You don't want to deal with that. So just start them by hand, slowly, take your time with this. Now we can turn this and we can start the bolts on this side. Yep, looks like I got this one going. Okay, they're all on the threads, so let's tighten them up. Turn this the other way, and back over here, let's tighten these. The torque for these 4 bolts is 59 foot-pounds. Now it's time to put the axle nut back on. With your new axle, you'll notice that it comes with this spacer here. This does not apply to this application. Only use the nut. And I'm just going to bottom it out all the way. And the torque for this is 174 foot-pounds. This not being a locking nut, I can spin it on by hand with no issues, and then we'll torque it. And what actually locks it in is, as you saw earlier when we took it apart, is this cap with the cotter pin. So let's tighten this down. Again, 174 foot-pounds. To be able to torque it that high, I'm going to use a pry bar, put it between the lug studs to prevent this hub from spinning as I tighten it with my torque wrench. That's it right there. Now put this on and make sure it lines up with the hole for the cotter pin. If it doesn't, just spin it until you get to the next slot that lines up. There we go. Perfect. Bend this over to lock it in. Now let's put this cap on. I like to put a little bit of grease around the edge. You can put RTV, or if you don't want to put anything, don't. But the reason I put grease is because it'll help it slide in easier, it'll prevent it from seizing on there, and it will ensure that it's sealed up all the way. Tap it in with a rubber mallet. Okay, make sure it's even all the way around, and if you did put anything on that edge, once you see it squish out, you know it's bottomed out. Perfect. Put on all 6 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then we'll torque them to 76 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.